What? I'm here. I'm on like I'm here. I'm doing a live office hours. What? I haven't done a live office hours in a long, 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 long time. What? I almost forget how to do it. What? Yeah, no. I don't forget. But it has been a while. It's been quite a while since I did some live office hours, but here we are. Here we are, friends. Here we are. My name is Dr. Shannon Coates. Feel free to call me Shannon. And yeah, hi. What? I'm a singer, I'm an educator, and I am a pedagogy maximizer coming to you live from north of Toronto in Ontario, Canada. Wow. Yes, I feel all out of practice. It has been a while. Okay, well, let's just jump in, right? Let's just do it. Hey, those of you who are in the singing sort of world, and especially in the voice teacher world, you will likely know that there has been a big kerfluffle about Cynthia Erivo. She did this interview recently, a couple days back, maybe last week, I don't even know, a while back. She did this interview with BBC, with the British Broadcasting Corp. And in this interview, she was talking about, the use of the voice and the way that she uses the voice. And to my mind, she chose her words like super carefully and taken within the context of what she was saying. It seemed to me that she was explaining her experience of using the voice in a thoughtful way. And she described her experience of the voice and of creating specific kinds of sounds in a way that may contradict some of our understanding of vocal function and how we create certain kinds of sounds. And so some of the things she said, when you sing a big note, and she had her hands like this to show what the vocal folds were doing. When you sing a big note, the folds are as relaxed as possible for the air to move through, something along those lines, she said. And then she followed that directly with, when you sing a high note, the vocal folds get closer together. So this is what she did with her hands to indicate what the vocal folds do. And lots of folks got sort of big mad about that, and like, that is incorrect. And I want to talk about that part of it, just the technical part of that. And then I wanted to talk a little bit about this faulty conflation, misguided conflation of knowing vocal function, knowing how the instrument works, with being a good voice teacher. Yeah, good voice teacher. So we often conflate those two. So I want to just talk about that and then talk about that. Let's talk about the actual vocal function stuff and the things that she actually talked about. So she said big notes, relaxed as possible, and she sort of indicated that the vocal folds do this. And then she said on high notes, the vocal folds do this, and they get closer together. And when we are working from some of the models that we have right now in technique, in vocal function, some of the models that we have talk about vocal folds being thick or thin, and we are very caught up in the sort of laryngeal registration. That we describe tonal outcomes in terms of what we think is happening at the larynx level, right? At the level of the larynx. So laryngeal registration, if you will. So we're like, oh, that's a chest voice sound, therefore the vocal folds are thick, or TA dominant, or, we talk about it in lots of different ways. And then we go, oh, that's a head voice sound, and therefore the vocal folds are long. And I want to just say, that is a model. That is a way of talking about what's happening physiologically. And it is a model that is not useful in some ways because it leaves out the role of what I talk about as pressurization and flow. Like, it leaves out the role of how much of the vocal folds are coming together, how held the vocal folds might be, which parts of the vocal folds are coming together, how much is possible to come together in terms of where we are in the pitch range. It leaves out a lot of different things. And the way that Cynthia Erivo talks about the vocal folds in relationship to big notes isn't necessarily wrong. Like, it really isn't. If we're considering some of these other factors that are at play when we're creating sounds. And she also says it needs to be as relaxed as possible. And it is possible that what she is talking about there is that if we are over pressurizing, if we are doing this on the big notes, then we're going to get a yell sound. We're not going to get the sort of call sound that we might be looking for. So she may just be talking about this in terms of a gradation, right? In terms of a spectrum. And so what it feels like to her is that as opposed to doing this, she's doing this with the folds. And that's fair. That's her experience of it, right? That's absolutely fair. And that is not wrong. Like it's not bad science. It's not objectively wrong. This is a very fair and valid description of both the science, the anatomy and physiology, and of her experience of creating that sound. This is valid. It's not wrong. Yeah. She talked about if we're pushing, which to me talks about, again, pressurization and this kind of holding, if you will, at the folds. So she talks about pushing and not using the air. And then if we push and if we do not use the air, then the vocal folds will rub together. And that's where polyps or nodules, which is bruising and blistering, can come from. So that is, to my mind, that's just a not sophisticated understanding, if you will, right? Like it's not like super wrong. She says the vocal folds will rub together. But if you are singing with over-pressurized sound at high, especially if you're singing at high frequencies, the folds will rub together. I mean, they're going to meet with a lot of impact, right? Like there's going to be this force as the vocal folds are meeting together. And that is what over time can cause nodules, right? She's not wrong on that. And you know what? Polyps are often the result of bruising, right? We get bruises and then polyps can come from bruising. So she's not wrong. It's just not a super sophisticated or clear description. It's not inherently wrong. It's not objectively wrong. I'm not mad. She talks about a blistering of the folds. Again, that's not a super great way to describe. I'm not mad about it. And so then she says we try to stop this, right? We want to make sure that we're not getting nodes or blistering by using honey or syrup to soothe the voice and by hydrating so they don't rub too much. Well, yeah. So honey and syrup do not touch the vocal folds when we swallow, but it didn't really sound to me like that's what she was saying. She wasn't saying, so we make sure that we coat the vocal folds with honey. She didn't say that. She just said, we use honey to soothe. And yeah, we totally do. We absolutely do. It's not soothing the vocal folds directly by coating the vocal folds, but it is soothing the rest of the instrument, which then can allow for us to coordinate in a different way. That can allow for us to find soothing or more relaxed, if you will, or more released ways of using the instrument, of finding coordinations. And that can allow for us to have a more coordinated or a more efficient coordination, if you will, which can be very useful in, avoiding some of the patterns that may lead to us having nodules. Like that is not, again, I'm not mad. I'm not mad about anything she said, in fact. So what I really loved about this is that she also did some demonstrations, which to my mind, the demonstrations that she did, like where she was demonstrating what she was talking about, were all about pressurization. Like we're all about very pressure levels. And I'm talking about this in a simplified way, of course, but they were all about very pressurization levels. And then the meeting of the vocal folds, if you will, in response to that pressurization level, or the pressurization level in response to our intention, which then the vocal folds, and then also the shape changing in the vocal tract in response to in order to propagate that sound wave that was, let's say, generated at the vocal fold levels. Let's just say it that way. So all of these things working in tandem toward our desire, right? Toward our intention. She said, so sometimes it sounds like she's wailing, but I'm manipulating the vocal folds so it sounds like, can't read my own writing. You're welcome. Sounds like I'm making a big sound. And then she demonstrates, and she does a breathy sound. She goes toward on that flow scale of what kind of pressurization or what the air is doing as it moves through the vocal folds, and the vocal fold response to that in terms of resisting that pressurization, and how much of the vocal fold is coming together, and the level of resistance, all of that stuff. And also the change in the vocal tract shaping in response to the vocal folds in a sort of simple model, if you will. All of those things together, she demonstrates it. So she demonstrates a breathy, light sound, if you will, and then she adds pressure to, and she goes into a more pressurized, louder, if you will, a little twangier too, if you will, a little brighter sound. She goes between the two. It is a masterful demonstration to my ear of exactly what she was talking about at the beginning. And then she says, it's using the air in the right way, sure, in the back of the throat instead of the front of the mouth, which to me talks about air, so pressurization, and the way that we use that air, and of course the response of the vocal folds, and then shaping. So she's feeling, she says it's in the back of the throat, versus at the front of the mouth, right? I can feel that sensation. I can get behind that description of the sensation of shape changing as well as pressurization differences. I can totally get behind that description. So that's the first reason I'm not mad at Cynthia Erivo. She also, to me, did not say things in terms of, this is objectively what happens, this is how we must sing, this is how we produce these sounds. To me, it was very much a sort of description of her understanding of the science, the anatomy and physiology, married to a description of her experience. So I'm not mad about that at all. The interesting thing around Cynthia Erivo's interview and around all of the responses, the interesting thing for me is the reaction from lots of voice teachers and coaches. So we had a couple of different reactions. One reaction was this rage around like, this is wrong information, and like, you shouldn't be putting this information out there, and she shouldn't be talking about technique. And there was a whole spectrum of that. Obviously there's a whole spectrum from like, well, who cares whether she talks about technique or not because she's not a teacher, you know, and also all the way over to like, she should never be talking about technique because she has this platform and like people are going to believe her, and like, so, you know, and it's wrong, and like she shouldn't be, right? There was this whole swing between sort of outrage and also like, well, it doesn't really matter because she isn't a voice teacher and like she's just a performer, blah. Underneath a lot of that, for me, there was this need for us as voice teachers and coaches to make sure people know that we know the thing. And this comes up, I think, a lot in us as voice teachers. Right? And the reason I want to talk about it is because, to me, this is a response to this taking on, if you will, that we as voice teachers have been wont to do, this taking on of a conflation between understanding vocal function or technique, understanding the science, if you will, understanding that as being the marker or hallmark of good teaching. Current understanding of vocal function is relatively new, like 20th century. Mid-1900s essentially is where we started to have this current understanding of vocal function and what's happening physiologically. We've had a couple of waves of, you know, vocal function information. We are currently experiencing another wave, if you will, of vocal function information that seems to be centered around acoustic information and understanding acoustics and understanding like acoustic registration and how sound waves propagate, etc. So we have this kind of like vocal science thing or vocal function thing that is coming to the fore, right? It is very much at the top of mind in our industry, with this caveat. It's at the top of mind for a very specific category, if you will, of teacher. So it's at top of mind for the folks who are either working in academia, related to academia, who have time to do research, who have the space to get the latest research, read the latest books, etc., interact with that research and that information. And it is not top of mind, to my experience, for the vast majority of independent voice teachers, especially those of us who I started out as a generalist voice teacher. For the generalist, sort of typical independent voice teacher, it's really not top of mind. Why is it not top of mind? Because we are so busy teaching that we, and also our studios are successful, what are we also trying to do? We're also marketing. We're also trying to get more students. We're trying to figure out a friggin' work-life balance. We're trying to figure out how to run a business. Lots of us got into teaching because it seemed like a nice way to do some money on the side while our kids were little, or because we weren't performing as much as we wanted to, or because we were waiting to get into grad school. Like, there are lots of reasons people got into teaching and still do, that have nothing to do with like making this my career, and then now all of a sudden it's my career. And so we're working to become, to be business, to run a business, and we are teaching. That is our full-time job, right? We are teaching. So top of mind is not whether or not I completely understand and can integrate acoustic registration into my teaching. The other thing that happens, and again, I'm talking experientially, this has been my experience, but also I work with primarily independent voice teachers who are generalists. That's who I work with. Those are the people I talk to the most often. What happens for independent voice teachers in that scenario very often is we can't figure out why the students we're working with, or the singers we're working with, do not seem to have perhaps the same success that we were hoping for, or perhaps not the fastest success we were hoping for. We have these very misplaced understanding of what the learning process is, understanding how to teach, understanding what to do and how learning works, right? We have this sort of misunderstanding about that because none of us have been trained in it, right? We don't have information about it. So, and most of us have never done an apprenticeship or had any mentoring, right? So we're getting no training in any of this, in any of the sort of teaching and pedagogy. And so when we feel like the teaching is frustrating, when we feel like we're resenting our students, when we feel like teaching is harder than we thought it was going to be, when we feel like the singers we're working with are not progressing in the way that we wanted them to, or when they're just not doing as well in like the external assessments that we want them to, that would tell us that we are a good teacher, those external assessments, such as, festivals, exams, et cetera, auditions. What happens? There's this trickle down from the folks who are working in that functional, who are prioritizing, if you will, vocal function, understanding anatomy and physiology, et cetera, et cetera. There's this trickle down from that says the reason that I must be experiencing these frustrations, the reasons that I'm not as good as I would like to be, the reason that my students aren't doing as well as so-and-so students is because I don't understand vocal function, because there's something missing in my understanding of anatomy and physiology. And so because there's this conflation of understanding anatomy and physiology / vocal function with being a good teacher or being an effective teacher. So we blame the ineffectiveness of our teaching, or our perceived issues or challenges in our teaching. We blame those on the fact that I don't know enough about how the voice works. And it isn't that I'm saying we don't need to know that, or that isn't a true thing, and that's possibly something that is missing, and that isn't going to support your teaching in some ways. But that is not fundamentally the issue here. Fundamentally, the issue is that we don't actually know how to teach well. We don't have teaching skills. We are teaching the way we were taught. We are teaching in a top-down, compliance-based manner. We are using external assessments to decide, like, whether or not our students do well in all of the festivals, to decide whether or not we are an effective teacher, and to decide and to tell whether or not we are good at our jobs, essentially. So when someone like Cynthia Erivo comes up and says some things that do not line up with our understanding of vocal function that we have worked hard to figure out, in some cases, we can get really annoyed. That can get us up in our feels, because we were shamed for not knowing that. We felt ashamed for not having that information. We felt like that was the reason that we weren't teaching well. And now she can get away with that? No, I have to prove that I'm a good teacher. I know this information, and she doesn't know that information. But that is a misplaced understanding of what it means to be an effective teacher, what it means to be an educator. Friends, our assessment of whether or not we are an effective teacher is based on whether or not our students do well in all of the exams, or get all of the auditions, or win at all of the festivals. We will teach to the test. We are not going to offer agency. We're not going to support agency. We're not going to support learning. We are going to work in a compliance-based way. We are going to teach to the test. We are going to tell singers how to get the mark. We're going to tell singers how to be good on their recital, how to get the best grade on their recital. And we're going to teach them in a way that does not offer them options, because we are super invested in being a good teacher by an external assessment. If we are assessing our teaching effectiveness by whether or not we have singers coming out of the studio, and this is more in an academic setting, I would think too, but whether or not we have singers coming out of the studio who are ready for the job market, in the sense that they are good colleagues, they show up on time, they learn their music, they blah, 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 blah. They're good to work with. We are going to teach from a compliance-based pedagogical framework, meaning everything about our teaching and about our effectiveness as a teacher is wrapped up in how they present themselves in the market with our colleagues, right? And so rather than give folks options, I was just talking about this with a teacher earlier today. If you want to audition for XYZ show, here are the ways you can do this. You can do it and sound exactly like whoever originated the role, whatever the recording is. You can do it that way. And I will work together to figure out how to do that. You can do it in a way that shows different strengths, different things that you want to about your voice, communicate something different than what the originator of the role did, or whatever they might be looking for. And I'll help you do that. The cost of doing it exactly the way that they might want to hear it, and the way that, say, like the originator of the role did it, is that you may lose something of yourself in that role, like in that audition. You may not be able to communicate in the way that you want to communicate. The potential benefit is that that may be exactly what they're looking for, and so they may be more likely to hire you. The benefit of doing maybe a song that isn't from the show, or whatever, like doing something that is using a different tonal outcome, or communicating in a different way than they might be expecting, is that you might be even more authentic. And if they are willing to take a risk, the benefit is that you get to be yourself in that audition and bring something really authentic and different and interesting to that audition. You get to be the artist you may want to be in that audition. The potential cost, is that they may not hire you. They may not book you, because that's not what they're looking for. So you get to decide. Do you see how I did not tell you all the things you have to do to get the audition? I'm also not going to tell you have to go in and you have to greet each person on the audition panel, and you have to walk with confidence, and you have to make sure that you do this with the accompanist, and you have to have your music in this specific way. I'm not going to tell you to do that. What I am going to do is say, here's the expectation. Here are the things that are likely going to contribute to them wanting to work with you. And also, you get to decide. If you don't want to greet all of the audition panel when you walk in, that's fine. You are allowed to walk in and do something different. The potential cost is that they don't like it. The potential benefit is that you get to be even more you. So I am not telling you to do a thing. I'm not teaching with compliance-based pedagogy here so that you reflect well on me, because I don't care, because my understanding of my effectiveness as a teacher is not based on whether or not you show up in a specific way in an audition or in a voice space. My understanding, my self-assessment of my effectiveness as a teacher is based on whether or not you got to make choices. It's based on whether or not you prepared you to be able to make the choices you wanted to make, with an understanding of the potential cost and the potential benefit, and with an understanding of what costs you're willing to pay or can pay. That's when I know that I've done my job. That's how I personally am assessing my effectiveness as a teacher. That's how I am assessing my effectiveness as a teacher, me personally, me, Shannon. Did the singer make choices, informed choices? They did? Good, I've done my job. So when I understand that my job as an educator is to support learning and to support singers to have choices and to be able to make informed decisions about how they want to use their voice, what choices they have, and what the potential cost is, and the benefit, when I understand that that is my role, student-centered pedagogy, agency-supporting pedagogy, supporting learning, education, all of those things, when I understand that that is my role, when I am teaching from that perspective, through that lens, and things aren't working the way that I hope they will, my first thought is not, oh, it's because I don't know enough about how the voice works. My first thought is, where am I getting in the way of the learning? How am I impacting the singer's ability to make choices? How am I getting in the way of the singer's ability to make choices? Where am I trying to take over? Where's my ego get in the way? Where's my need to be the expert in a specific way getting in the way? Where am I using my expertise to tell people what to do rather than to offer them options? And then I can take vocal function courses, or I can take vocal anatomy courses, I can take anatomy and physiology courses, and those things supplement, they support my teaching. They don't become a replacement for my teaching. And then when I see someone like Cynthia Erivo saying stuff that I don't understand to be true, even though they kind of are, I don't understand to be true, it doesn't bother me at all. She's making her choices. Great. Also, she's a damn fine singer and performer. She's making her choices, right? Let me say one other thing. So another reaction here along the lines of, well, she's not a teacher, so it doesn't matter, like she's not a teacher. So if she says stuff that isn't correct, like it doesn't really matter anyway. And then there's the reaction of like, yes, but in our academic systems, we bring people who are really good performers into our academic systems. And the problem is that they're like Cynthia Erivo, they don't know vocal function, and so therefore they're a bad teacher. No, the reason they're not an effective teacher is because they don't have teaching skills. The reason they're not an effective teacher is because they are taking all of their experience and imposing it on the singers they're working with. The reason they're not an effective teacher in academia, and in all of the rest of our work that we do. In academia, in particular, when we've invited performers to come in who have no teaching training or skills, when we invite performers to come in, the reason they're not an effective teacher is because they think that their job is to tell you, the singer, what to do. And in many cases, they think that their experience of the voice and how they've experienced it is how everyone else experiences it and how everyone should experience it, because that's what they were told and how they were taught. In our academic institutions, in our post-secondary education systems, no teachers are taught how to teach. At some universities, there are courses on how to, do classroom management, or there are some courses on like how to put together a syllabus, how to understand learning outcomes, blah, 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 in some universities for sure. But you don't have to have a teaching degree to teach at a university, not at all. So when we are talking about the folks who are teaching one-on-one lessons, and lots of folks have had really not great experiences in their post-secondary education with their one-on-one voice teacher, with their one-on-one instructor, and in sort of learning how to sing with that instruction model, lots of folks did not have good experiences. That isn't because the teacher didn't know enough about vocal function. It's because they didn't know how to teach and have teaching skills. And again, when we conflate vocal function, understanding of vocal function, with being a good teacher, we do all of us a disservice. Okay, let me wrap this all up. I am not saying that knowledge of vocal function is a bad thing in any way, shape, or form. And as Sven pointed out in one of the comments in my post earlier today, most of us have come into contact with the results of vocal science, voice science, and vocal function exploration and understanding of vocal function indirectly through our teachers, through our choir. I am not saying that we should not have or want a deeper understanding of vocal function. I'm saying that is not the thing that makes us an effective teacher. The whole reason that I developed the Vocal Instrument 101, which is my anatomy and physiology course, the whole reason that I developed the Vocal Instrument 101, which, by the way, I have had to update, I think I first developed it in 2018. I've updated it, especially the acoustics part, and the phonation part. I've updated that 4 times now, because the information, the sort of accepted information, keeps getting updated. It keeps getting a little more complex, which is fine. Whatever. I'm happy. I'm very adept at breaking concepts down. But the reason that I developed the Vocal Instrument 101 in the first place was because I had only experienced anatomy and physiology courses and vocal function courses through an academic lens. And because I came from a traditional generalist voice studio, I'm teaching like 6-year-olds, I'm teaching 67-year-olds, I'm teaching people who have never wanted to sing classical in their whole lives and never do. I'm teaching like everybody because I knew what was most useful for a generalist voice teacher, being one. A lot of the way that the information was presented from a point of view. Folks who only taught matured instruments with a certain level of coordination already available to them, and who wanted to sing Western classical or maybe music theater. So the information, and you say, but Shannon, anatomy and physiology, vocal function is vocal function. Oh, but no, it's not. Because if I am assuming who you are teaching, if I think that you are teaching the same people that I am teaching, if I think that you are only teaching like 18 to 24-year-olds matured instruments, if I think that those are the only people you're teaching, the information comes through a very specific lens then. And it basically only applies to teaching 18 to 24-year-olds how to do Western classical singing. Like that's what it comes through. It does not give me options in terms of teaching anyone else. It only gives me the information I need to teach those singers. And those are the very singers that I'm never teaching in my independent voice studio. I'm teaching everyone but those singers in an independent voice studio. Right? Everyone but those singers. So that is the reason that I developed the Vocal Instrument 101 in the first place, is because I wanted there to be vocal function information out there for independent voice teachers that is geared toward understanding the options we have teaching styles, teaching all ages, and also that is taught through a non-prescriptive lens. So that was the other thing, that for the most part, the anatomy and physiology courses that I took, the vocal function courses, the information that I gathered from textbooks, etc., was all delivered through a prescriptive lens, meaning this is good alignment, this is good breathing, here's how you do it right. This is what a balanced onset is. This is what balanced registration is. This is what, like, do you see how that is through a prescriptive lens? This is, you must do it this way. This is the only option. But no, there are lots of ways to have good posture. Balanced onset is really just the onset that allows you to do the thing, the tonal outcome you want to have, that allows you to get that tonal outcome in the most efficient way possible. That is a balanced onset. So if I am doing a belt sound, that was a balanced onset, even though it was kind of glottal. Still balanced because it gave me the tonal outcome I wanted to in the most efficient way possible, right? So you see how then we're working through like, hey, what does balanced onset mean? Well, it actually means what are the options for the tonal outcome that you want? So the Vocal Instrument 101 is delivered through a non-prescriptive lens for independent voice teachers, and that is the reason that I developed it in the first place. Because I wanted voice teachers to have vocal function information. Of course I do. Of course. It's not a bad thing. I'm not mad. But I wanted voice teachers to have the vocal function information in a way that is very clearly communicating that the reason we want vocal function information is so that we can offer students options, not so that we can tell them what to do. That's also the reason I developed the Voice Ped Degree. So the Voice Ped Degree, it's like 10 months of working together in a cohort, and we are learning how to teach in a practicum over time. We are bringing in pedagogic principles, understanding why we do these things, how learning works. We're understanding how to deliver information in a way that allows for the singers to have options versus telling them what to do. We're examining our role as voice teachers. We are also removing some of that shame and some of that imposter syndrome around, but I don't know enough information. Like I can't be a good voice teacher because I don't know enough information. I don't have enough I don't understand YZ thing, and so therefore I can't be a good voice teacher. Or when you're teaching well, let's figure out how you teach well. Let's figure out how to assess your own teaching and what assessment parameters matter to you in terms of your own teaching. And then let's see how when you start to understand that vocal function information, you feel validated in your teaching. Inevitably, when I'm working with folks on pedagogy, when we start to learn how to teach, when we start to embrace the pedagogical patterns or principles that align with our values, that align with the kind of teacher and educator that we want to be. Of course, we examine the philosophy that says that I have to tell people what to do in order to be a good educator. And in order to be able to tell people what to do, I have to know all of the vocal function, or else I can't tell people what to do. We examine that, we leave that on the table, and we pick up another philosophy, which is I'm here to offer options and to support you in your learning and agency. We take that, and then when we start to say, oh, so when you were listening to the student and you were asking for, and they wanted to do XYZ thing, and you wanted to hear more of XYZ thing, and your first instinct was to use this kind of sound to allow for them to discover that sound and coordination for themselves. Guess why? Well, that's related to pressurization and shaping of the vocal tract. And then rather than feeling shamed because they did not understand the information, they feel validated because their teaching skills allowed them to get to the point where that singer discovered the coordination for themselves. And once they learn the actual vocal function or what's actually happening in there, they're like, well, of course that's what's happening. That makes perfect sense. It's validating rather than shaming. Okay, I've talked long enough. Thank you for entertaining these thoughts or staying with me on this journey. I'm not mad at Cynthia Erivo, and I think she is not wrong about her understanding of vocal function. I'm also not mad at the voice teachers who are mad at Cynthia Erivo. I understand. I understand why. I understand why it kicks us in the butt when we see someone perpetrating information that we understand to be false. I know why. Yeah, let's leave it there. Have a great weekend.